Welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is the Grant Readiness Roadmap. Find your weak spots before a funder does. My name is David Gates, and I'm GrantStation Senior Director of Online Education. Now, during today's webinar, Alice Ruhnke is going to introduce you to a Grant Readiness Roadmap your organization can use to pinpoint exactly where you stand and exactly what to fix first. Alice is the President of Education and Outreach here at GrantStation, and having raised over $45 million from federal, state, and private grant makers, she knows what it takes to get funded. And today she's going to share that expertise with you, so please welcome Alice Ruhnke.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you all for being here on this Wednesday. We've got a kind of a fun hour here to talk about the different things that we can be working on to make our organizations as kind of grant fundable as possible, and tips and resources as to how to do that and increase that capacity of your organization. Now, I could ask everyone on this webinar, are you ready for grant funding? And every one of you would probably raise your hands and say, yes, I'm ready for grant funding, right? We're always ready to get the money. However, sometimes our organizations maybe aren't quite ready to receive and manage those dollars in a way that funders are really looking for. So that's kind of what this webinar is about. How do we close that gap between being ready to accept funds versus being ready to compete for funds? As we go through, I don't think that there's any level where I would say, you are just have no capacity to receive grants, those sorts of things. It's really quite on a continuum. Of being kind of just starting out to being really, kind of ready and prepared. But we're always, improving how we're running our organizations, how we're doing the work that we do, so that funders and donors feel really confident in us, that they really believe in what we're doing, our accountability, our transparency, all those sorts of things. So that's what we're going to spend our time on today. And what we're going to do is look at an assessment that you will get with the materials. And it's a 20-question roadmap. We'll kind of talk through the sections kind of first, look at the roadmap, and then we also will then look at, kind of what your scores are, how you can prioritize different areas. And number 3, with kind of some different strategies or resources and support to help you if your capacity is low in one area, where can you go to improve that? So we've got resources kind of pointing you to different things that you can do. And then we'll wrap up with really looking at then how do we communicate all of our capacity, all of our grant readiness in our proposals when we're writing, so that funders really know upfront that we have the systems, have the capacity, have the ability to do the work that we set out to do. So there's 3 areas that I've come up with on this assessment. These are just kind of, there's no set areas. These are just areas that encompass a lot of different things. And so under organizational readiness, we're really going to look at, your mission clarity, your governance, your legal standing, and then some of those documents that are kind of like pre-written, pre-developed, just because as you are writing more grant applications, the more materials that you can repurpose, that you can reuse over and over, it just enhances your readiness, right? You're not starting from scratch every time. So just having some of those documents really helps you out. A big area is budget and financial management. All funders are really looking at that. The financial systems that you have, kind of sustainability, those sorts of things, your transparency as an organization. And then finally, the third kind of bucket that I've put everything in is reporting and compliance. So, having those systems set up of your policies, of being able to provide those financial and programmatic reports to the funder, all those sorts of things go into that bucket. And so, as we go through some of these, you'll probably notice that some of them, when you're writing a grant application, a funder will ask you that question specifically. What is your sustainability plan? Tell me your history as an organization and what you've done in the past. And so some of these things, you'll be writing answers to in your applications. And then some of them are either kind of assumed or they might be like hidden, if you will, not hidden, but the messages are within the attachments that you are required to submit with your application. So, usually in a kind of a standard grant application, you're going to have that project narrative where they ask you all the questions and you write out all the answers. Usually they ask you for a budget and a budget narrative. And those are the things that are usually kind of officially scored, if you will, as a reviewer is looking through your application, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of those areas. Sometimes they actually do put a numerical score. Sometimes it's just more of a, kind of on a continuum from, low to high sort of thing. But some of these things, the reviewers are going to find in the attachments. So let's say you're required to submit your 990 tax document as one of the attachments. Or another really common one is your board of directors list. And so they're like looking for information within those as well. So they're, looking for that information as to, the financial stability of your organization. They're looking at that board member list. We're going to go through these in a little bit more detail. And they usually, again, don't inherently have a score, but they are part of that overall picture of your organization. So just a little bit of a warning, sometimes, as a grant professional, as a grant writer, you're spending all your time in that writing part and doing the narrative or putting your budget together. And, we don't think of those attachments, or that the attachments aren't as up to date as they could be. Or things that are in the attachments that maybe need a bit of explanation aren't explained. So just kind of think of a lot of this, is either stuff that they're officially asking for you to answer. Sometimes the answers are kind of hidden in your attachments or your kind of overall package. And then there's also just going to be some of these things that, maybe they never ask for, but there will be compliance issues that you will be expected to adhere, to do. And so you want to make sure that you have those documents. So we're going to, go through each section by section, but just kind of realizing how these different areas are kind of, what funders are kind of looking for in these different areas. So some of the different things around organizational readiness. Eligibility obviously is a big one, and it's usually the first screen that as applications come in, they're checking that everything in your application is there that needs to be there, and that you have the 501c3 status if that was a requirement, or that you at least have, that you're a nonprofit entity, depending on the funder, right? So eligibility is usually, quite a red light, green light sort of situation. If you're not eligible, usually they don't even go any farther to read the application. Some of the other things that, again, that they're looking for is that you do have this board of directors that is really, looking at your financials As you're, doing different things to describe your organization, I think that you would want to, kind of communicate, um, the cadence of which you meet. So we meet quarterly. Our, 12-member board of directors meets every month, whatever, kind of to, just to really show that capacity. So that usually that's kind of in a background section where you're writing about your organization. Um, the clear roles between board and executive director and staff, those usually come in when you're looking at that board list. That's a pretty common attachment that they ask for. And there's, big red flags when you see a very, very small board of directors, just, maybe 3 or 4 people. That's always kind of a red flag of that the board of directors is not really overseeing the organization. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying it's kind of a red flag that there's not a lot of oversight because there's very few people. And then this is just kind of a red flag that I see a lot when I see in a board of directors list, and I see a lot of family members where you can kind of tell that the board of directors is like all from one family. In a family foundation, completely acceptable. The foundation is running the organization, but in a nonprofit, there's a lot of conflict of interest if one family is really monopolizing the board. The other thing is when you see in that list, if the executive director is actually on the board. They are not board members. The executive director is led by the board. So while an executive director would be at the board meetings and be reporting and be working with the board, they're not a member of the board, sort of thing. So again, you can kind of see how this is like how they're reading between the lines of some of these things. Looking at just kind of staffing capacity, do you have the ability? Do you have paid staff that will be, handling the work that you're proposing in your application? And then also, what's that process of? Do you have an accountant that is on staff? Do you contract with someone who works 20 hours a week? Those sort of things, but kind of that understanding that they'll want to see that you have, that financial person, that program person to be able to report on. And then these last two on here, you always want to be working from a strategic plan. Where is your organization going in the next 3 years? I don't see it very often that they ask for that strategic plan, but I think that if, as again, you're writing about your initiatives, your programs, kind of talking about how this program fits within your larger vision, again, is like short little things that you can weave into your applications. That's not going to take a lot of space, but going to then connect with them that yes, we have a vision, a plan, and this is part of that plan, right? So it's a little bit about weaving in this good information. And then kind of a last one here is like having a logic model or any other just sort of program descriptions. These are just good things to have. A logic model, is usually a one-page thing that shows what you need to run your programs, what you do, how much you do, and then it measures how people change because of the work that you're doing and how you're going to measure that change. So those can just be really helpful, tools to have around, again, that you're pulling information from. It just makes you more grant ready. An opportunity pops up that's coming up in 3 weeks and you weren't quite prepared. Having those things really helps you to just have your own capacity as an organization to get the application together and get it done and get it in. So kind of with these, what funding ready looks like, again, this isn't a complete list, just a couple of things, but, having that 501c3 status, having that active board of directors that you can weave in there, your program descriptions. Some of those other red flags, again, might be where we look at everything and, they're all of your money comes from one funder. That would be something that would actually, this one should be over in the financial one. I apologize for that. But when we see that, like, oh gosh, you guys don't have diversified funding, everything's coming from one place, that makes you nervous as a funder. If that funding element goes away, is my money going to be helpful in this situation, or am I just wasting my money because the whole program goes away? But a red flag around organizational readiness would be, really where you haven't, the board hasn't worked together, you haven't had any quorums, those sorts of things. There's no committees. Now, as you're small, you might not have committees, and that's not, again, none of these knock you out, but the kind of, as you grow and get bigger, you'd probably be working from more a committee structure, and they can see that. And then they just see the activeness of the board. The second section is budget and financial management. Usually this is kind of the first place a funder is going to look. A lot of funders and reviewers, they look at your financials first, and then they kind of come back and read your narrative and all those sorts of things. Some places even, when there's volunteer reviewers, which I've been a part of many times, they might even have a budget committee that looks specifically at your 990s, and maybe if you're required to have an audit, and they look at those, and there's kind of this separate committee. And then they tell us as the reviewers if there's anything to watch out for, any questions to ask, any areas that are of concern, because not every reviewer in a reviewer situation understands how to read a 990 or an audit and what it means. So a lot of times this is like a specific task that someone in the foundation does, or like I said, if it's a volunteer sort of situation that the committee does. So again, just looking that you do have that diversified revenue is really important, as they're looking at your overall structure of how things are funded. Really working with, an organizational budget, an annual organizational budget that your board approves each year. Usually that's, again, another attachment that is included. So you are usually attaching your program budget, but that organizational budget, again, is kind of an afterthought, but making sure, again, that that's as up to date, that you're really demonstrating that the board has approved that. Your ability to track grants separately from your general operating funds. So again, as you're talking about your own capacity, in the organizational background section, really, demonstrating that you use, a software, or that you are tracking your grants, separately, so that you can pull out exactly what was spent on this grant versus that grant. Again, really small organizations that are just starting out, sometimes I've seen where they open up separate checking accounts, right? Because they maybe didn't have the software to be able to pull that apart, so that they're tracking things that way. That's kind of an extreme now. I mean, I think there's a lot of tools that you can purchase that help you track your grants separately. And then making sure that, again, the tax forms that you have, that you filed those on time. If you do have audits that are required, that they're up to date, that if there's any findings that they have, that you've addressed those, or you put a plan together, those sorts of things. So again, kind of, a funder would really look at your 990, be able to see kind of what's been going on in your organization. They can really see that you've had some growth, that you've, managed funds, all those sorts of things. And again, this was the red flag from the other side that I didn't delete. But if they see, a lot of funds coming in from one place, that's just going to be something that's going to make them very concerned about funding you. And then the last bucket that I have here is grant reporting and compliance. This is kind of a little bit of a before and after kind of thing. Part of it is like the written policies that that you have, the policies about, how you manage your finances and how you're governed, how you run your programs, your basic operations around human resources and things like that. Those are usually not things that a funder is going to ask for, but they're going to assume that you have them. And so they're very helpful because then if you run into any issues, you have that written policy to always fall back on, what your procedures are, all those sorts of things. The only written policies I've ever seen that a funder has specifically asked for is the conflict of interest policy. And I have seen that where they've asked organizations to submit that with their applications. But those, again, usually are not asked for, but there is that assumption that you're working from them. Kind of looking at your programs and being able to demonstrate that you've had an impact on the people that you've served. That comes from your evaluation process. So, being able to demonstrate to the funder that you've, operated and provided these programs, and being able to communicate the solutions that you have and how people have improved because of the work that you do. That's going to be something that's going to enhance your ability to get the grant. And it's going to be something that they're going to expect on the back end in your reporting, that you can demonstrate how people changed over time. That kind of goes back to the logic model that I was talking about. Those have those components in it. So again, they help you get the grant, and then they're going to be expected to be reported out at the end of the grant cycle. I also have in here a kind of continuous improvement process. I don't know if those words are a little bit old, but what's your process by taking the information that you get and improving your services? So are you, always taking information, looking at what's happened with your outcomes? How are you using your data to improve your services or expand your services or reach out to new target populations? Whatever it is you're doing, is there a process, and how do you use that data? That's a kind of a common question that you'll see in a grant application, where they just say, how do you use the data that you collect? And talking about, again, how you use it to improve performance, improve your services is a great answer around that. And then we've also kind of talked about just, they'll want to see, do you have the ability to submit these reports on time? They all have different kind of cadences as to how often you have to do it. It's also something that I really encourage you to look into before you apply, because some have pretty rigorous reporting where maybe you have to do it every month, or you have to use a shared database with another group of service providers. So always look into that as you're writing the applications and making sure that you have the ability to do that, because if you get the grant, then you'll be expected to do that. So kind of, again, one little thing of Funder Ready is, having that policy binder, or, policies and procedures that's either a physical copy or on shared drives, really, how you're operating, that can be shared with anybody. And then one of, again, a red flag is when you're reviewing grant applications, when people are telling you about their success in the past, all those sorts of things, and they can't come up with data and numbers and percentages and things like that, and they use adjectives. So like, oh, we are just we've been transformative in helping students do XYZ. If there's no numbers behind it, if there's no specifics behind it as to what you're really improving with, how many students improved and all those sorts of things, again, it's kind of a red flag. Are you not tracking this information? Are you really evaluating it or not? If you can't tell me in the application, I don't know that you have the ability to do that. Just again, some different red flags there. So what I'm going to do next is show you an assessment that you can use, and then how we can kind of hit just a little priority kind of thing as to what you want to do first, second, third, different strategies around closing that gap and where you can go to get the support, and then how you can use this information and put it into your proposals. Again, a lot of this is weaving little pieces into your narrative as you're writing, to really let the funder know what a lot of that kind of back end stuff is, and that organizational capacity that you have. So I'm going to show you this assessment. It's in 3 sections, the same 3 sections that I just spoke about. And each question kind of has, there's questions about different capacities within each area. And then finally, as you're answering each question, it's not just a yes or a no. It's that kind of, we haven't started this, or we've done it but we haven't formalized it yet in our organization, or we're kind of developing, we're in the process, or kind of established. So I kind of like having a continuum, because none of this means if you don't have one thing, it doesn't mean okay, I'm out, right? I don't get the grant. It's really about kind of taking these different areas and then how do you improve them. And some you might have very, very high results, and some you might need to work on. So none of this is to tell you that you don't have the capacity to apply for grants, but where you can make those improvements. So I'm first going to share the assessment, which you'll get again as part of as your handouts. And so again, you can kind of see there's 20 questions in this, all working within the different sections of first, that mission statement that you're really using and connecting that to the funders and their missions, and that you're really using that as the basis of your organization. A second one is just that 501c3 status. Most funders are looking for you to have that 501c3 status. However, others will allow you, if you are a nonprofit entity like a government agency or a church or something like that, and you're a nonprofit in that regard, but you don't have the 501c3, that they'll fund you anyway, but others won't. So others really want you to get that 501, and you're going to open up yourself to more funders if you get that 501c3 status. Looking at your board, how engaged is it? Having that documentation of your strategic plans, and then your staff capacity. And then this, again, they can be used any way that, and developed anyway. But again, the more things that you have written, that you have developed, that you have planned, just the more shovel ready it is for you to then tell the funder about your projects. So just your ability to turn things around will just dramatically increase with having more of this information. So you can go through, then you'll just, kind of score, these are the points, and have kind of your section on that. The second one is that budget and financial management, that annual operating budget. Do you have one that you work from, that you review every board meeting? How do you maintain your financial records? Are you using accounting software that helps you put things into grant buckets, so that you can track everything separately? If you're struggling in this area at all, I really encourage you to look at TechSoup. They have a lot of software that helps nonprofits, and you could find that financial software that you might need to help you if you're, kind of still in a checkbook register mode or in just spreadsheet kind of mode. Looking at how you allocate costs across your different programs. The sooner that you can kind of do this, the easier it is in kind of financial management. And so again, if you're a really small organization and you have just one program, this really doesn't come into play much. But if you have several different initiatives that you offer, having that process by which you take your rent and you allocate it across the 3 programs, or taking your utilities and spread the cost out across your programs. Having those is a great thing to be able to really show in your budget how much each program costs. And so the sooner you can do that, the better. And then do you either do an audit or do your 990s? Now, not everybody's going to have an audit. And sometimes an audit is just going to be cost prohibitive for a low budget organization. If you find that a funder asks for that as a requirement, I would also contact them beforehand if you don't have an audit and ask if there's a workaround around that. Again, they'll tell you yes or no. But I found that sometimes, we've been able to submit other documents in lieu of an audit because this organization is just too small to have one. And then I've seen other funders that just say, well, then you don't qualify, so you can't submit. So, again, there's your answer. But making sure those are done and up to date. I've already kind of talked a little bit about that, tracking across different grants. And then the diversity issue of having, more than, one funding source, having a few, and having, reserve funding is also, always adds some strength to, having that reserve back. It really shows the funder that you have sustainability within your organization. Another one is just the indirect costs, which again, all funders have different rules on that. Do they allow you to submit those costs to the funder? Do they ask you instead to make a line item for each and every cost? Again, it depends funder to funder. As you go up the food chain of grants and you start to get into government grants, your state, city, local, federal, all those sorts of things, then you're going to have a more rigorous process to get those indirect cost rates determined for your organization. This is also just, I think, an important one to realize as you're out there searching for grants, that sometimes funders work on a reimbursement schedule. So it's always really important to know if they do work that way, and if they do, that you have those gap funds to pay the expenses and then wait to be reimbursed. That's something to, if you don't have those funds, always something really important to know how they do it before you apply, because if you don't have the gap funds, then you wouldn't be able to manage the grant funds that way. So kind of knowing that up front, and if that's required or not. Then the last section is, again, looking at, do you track what you do? Do you track how much you do? Do you have that documentation? Also, sometimes you'll hear it called a process evaluation of measuring what you do. Whereas in question 16, this is a little bit more about measuring the impact of what you do. So question 15 is, measuring your process. Question 16 is measuring the people that you serve and how they change over time and how they get better, or, move from one situation to a better situation because they've been interacting in your programs. The next one is about those written policies. Always, if you've not done any of that, asking your peers if you can see their policies and procedures can be a nice kind of head start. I also have some other samples and stuff that you can use as well. How you are communicating your outcomes with stakeholders. So this might be from how you're doing it with your funders. Do you have that process and you report back to funders already? Is it also something that you can do with your donors to communicate to them the impact of what they gave? So I think both are really important, even though we're talking more about the grant side here. Then the last two are really, are you kind of working across systems? Are you, using software that everybody can, everybody on the staff can really plug in, and that just again increases your own capacity to submit more grants. You can share work across the team, that sort of thing. So just, stuff that really kind of helps you internally to apply for more applications. And then finally, what is that process for improvement that you have? So how do you, at the end of each year or each program or however it works for you, how do you take that information and make meaning of it, make sense of it, and help your organization to do better, change your programs, add things, delete things as necessary? So you can kind of see here, you would want to look at each different, category specifically. And then you can really kind of look, you might have one overall, which is fine out of the 60. But as we go through, I'm going to show you the resources next. I think you want to look at each category independently. And then how do you fix that if more of your problems are around the budgeting area? How do you fix that? So I'm going to go ahead real quick and show you the resources. So you can do this assessment. And then here are some things that we have. So again, I have the resources in the same categories. And I have them in different areas as well. So there's a few that are, if you're a member of GrantStation already, that they're part of your member benefit, that you're getting access to these tools. There's a few on here that they're courses that if you want to take or a class, you can pay to take that class. And then all the rest are free. So these are all really great tools for you, but I just wanted to kind of show you, all the way from free to some member benefits. So we do have a proposal reviewer that you can use using our grant scorecard that can really help you with each different part of your application. Then here you can see, and you can just link right to these different articles and things. But if your issue was around your mission statement or getting your 501c3 or working with your board, creating a high working board. And then the last resource is about fiscal sponsors. So if you don't have your 501c3 and you want, to still offer your programs, you can use what's called a fiscal sponsor. And this is a group that of fiscal sponsors, and then kind of what are the best practices around that. So all different areas, within organizational readiness. I'm also just going to show you our Pathfinder. This is a free resource for anybody, a member or not, where you can come in and look at different articles and tools and resources around all of the things that we're talking about today. So you can get, support on writing that mission statement or developing that 501c3 or whatever. And I'll kind of show you that. From the budget section, again, we have a diversification assessment for those who are members. But we also have free information from, your own budgeting to really setting up your foundation and how you track that information. This is linked to TechSoup, which is also who I was referring to with the accounting software. When we're looking at how do we do cost allocations across different programs, if you have several, you can look through this to get those basics. We do have a webinar if you want to take that. That one is for purchase. Again, there's more resources in the Pathfinder. And then with compliance and reporting, we do a logic model webinar a couple times each year. So you can take that webinar. There's also lots of free tools out there to learn on your own. This one from the Urban Institute really has a lot of great examples that you can use. And I like it. It kind of has different program areas. So, like, oh, I'm different from this organization. Here's a kind of a learning organizations and evaluation, how to kind of set that up, another kind of self-assessment as to how you're doing things. And then more of the governance stuff where we need those policies that show that we are operating our finances and our guidance, overall, what was my word, governance, all those sorts of things. And then again, the Pathfinder. So when you'll get both of these, you can just come and link to all of these different resources. And I want to really quickly, I know I'm going to run out of time here, but I want to show you something else really quickly, which is just the Pathfinder, which, like I said, is a free resource. I'm going to show it to you at the end. I'm going to come back and show you the Pathfinder at the end because I don't have it pulled up right now. So I'll do that in a bit. But I'm going to go back to the presentation, and I'll show you that at the end. So just a couple things then, as you're kind of looking, you might find that, some of these things are just emerging for you. Some of them you're really strong on, you don't need to, worry about. But, kind of doing it in the quad system of, what are, the easiest, lowest hanging fruit that can help you increase that capacity, kind of prioritizing some of that low hanging fruit that isn't going to take a whole lot of time. And then, also looking at, then what kind of funder impact does it have? And so, something like if you, are behind on your audit and your 990s, it's going to take a little more time. That's something you got to kind of plan for, but it's going to have a high impact. If a funder sees that your 990s aren't up to date, they're going to really wonder what's up with you, and you're going to lose credibility just on that one attachment, right? So again, doing some of these other things where, we're training our board to do more, be more active in finances. Again, you can do that fast. It's going to have a big impact. Creating your logic models, you can do that. So, kind of putting it into, this framework, I think can help build momentum. You might look at it and go, oh my gosh, there's so much I can do. I'm overwhelmed. We don't want that to happen. Just again, looking at sometimes those small wins keeps the momentum going. So putting that, these different areas in these different categories can really help to just make the process sustainable, to make it that you're not worn out and tired of it before you even start. So here's just some examples of, as you're looking at things, these are just examples, but as you go through these different resources and you start to learn more things and what you can do to, again, create that logic model, or in this one, it was an organization that just had the one contract and no reserve, and the audit was out of date, right? So, a funder looking at that is going to just have red flags just blaring out of their brains, because they're going to be nervous about your sustainability. You don't have any money saved up at all, and you're not, keeping up with your audit. So again, this is a little bit longer period of time that you would want to plan to, improve this area. But you can see down here are the kind of steps. They put a calendar together to get that audit current. Then they built a reserve policy where they're going to be taking a percentage of all the unrestricted dollars that come in and starting to put that away in a small reserve fund. And then, kind of the bigger ask was then taking and diversifying their funding mix so they weren't reliant on just one funding source. So again, you can kind of see, it's a process. This one was a bigger process. Some of them won't be so hard. Here's just an organization that had, kind of tracking that wasn't effective. They weren't really able to communicate, how people kind of improved and those sorts of things. They tracked how many meals they served, but that's all that they could really track. So they built that logic model to start to develop those outcomes. How do people change? Then they got a tool and they used it, and then they're able to now really demonstrate how many people went from, place A to place B because of their services. So, again, this kind of closing the gap step is going to be different for each and every one of you, how you're going to set that process up. But starting with those resources and learning more about the different areas will really help you decide what steps to take. And then part of kind of the last little step is then, when we're writing in our applications, just ways to weave in this capacity. When we're writing our organizational background, really focusing in on the highest impact things that we do, really, demonstrating the difference that you've made in people's lives and being able to, use data and potentially stories to do that work. That's really going to strengthen your application. They're going to know you're an organization that tracks this information. In your evaluation plan, again, looking maybe and really discussing what tools you're going to use, how often you're going to do these evaluations, again, really demonstrate that you have a plan in place. If you've had also maybe the staff member or the person that's going to be responsible for that, again, that kind of detail will really inform the funder that you're implementing this evaluation plan. Your budget narrative is when you take your budget numbers and you write out how that information was calculated. So what your math was. So if you needed, $15,000 for salaries, that you were saying it's for this particular staff member, it's for this many hours at this rate of pay. And so that they understand the numbers behind the budget. And so again, like I said, a lot of reviewers go right to that budget and budget narrative. They read that first, and then, then your proposal should match that budget narrative, right? Everything that you're asking funds for should be talked about in that project narrative, so that, they see everything that you're asking for and how you're going to use those staff members or use this software or what this consultant's going to do for you, whatever. That continuous quality improvement, again, I think you can put that within your evaluation plan, but always, talking about, how you're going to use the data to improve. Letters of support, we really haven't talked about much about partners, and they're all very, very important to grant applications. But as you're doing those letters of support, again, make sure that they're very tied to the project that you're asking for funding for. Make sure the role of each partner is really outlined. Again, usually those are just attachments, so we sometimes don't, spend a lot of time on them. But they are telling the story of your organization and how your program is going to work and those sorts of things, which really ties in with this last one of just the attachments. Again, once a year, usually you can go in to your attachments, make your updates, get your most recent 990, your most recent board list, your most recent job descriptions and resumes and things like that. Have them all available and up to date. And that will really, again, help inform the funder about your organization. And like I said, sometimes we think of them last, and yet they do tell a lot of your story. And so important to make sure that those are consistent with what you're saying in your narrative. Here's just some examples. I might kind of just go through these, but you can kind of see where, that having that ability to really use specific language really demonstrates what you do versus what you don't. And so saying we are fiscally responsible and manage our budgets carefully is kind of a nonsense sentence in a grant. There's nothing to back it up. It doesn't mean anything if I can't see it. And so, you can see over here where it's written out, you can really see that they're fiscally responsible. And that's right, they made with their actions and their words, right? So that sort of specificity really shows your organization's capacity to do the work. Again, here we track outcomes versus what we do with the folks that we serve versus how people improved because of your services. So I don't think that it necessarily takes a lot longer, a lot more narrative. A lot of this is tweaking some of what you've already done to be able to weave this capacity in. And I know that we're always worried on word count and always trying to make it less and less, but I don't think that it's something where I think you can easily take different things and change it into being more impactful information about your organization and your capacity. And then these last ones I just kind of threw in as just grant capacity tips. Working with your peers, I think, is really important. Asking them, how they do things. If you are going after a particular funder, looking at the people who've been awarded in the past and reaching out to them can also be a great way to learn more about that funder and what they care about the most, and maybe what some of the hoops that nonprofit had to jump through. You can kind of learn that ahead and learn that up front, and then when you do meet with that funder or submit something, you've maybe already addressed some things that are particular to them, that they're always looking for. And then in, federal and state grants, I've always just been find a friend in a state agency. A little bit harder right now in the federal government, but, find that person that you can connect with, that you can talk to, that can maybe tell you, kind of what's going on. They won't be able to tell you anything confidential or anything, but they might be able to say, hey, yeah, no, next year we're going to be focusing more, instead of on recovery services, housing for recovery, and then that kind of direction that they have. A second one is just reading successful proposals. You can go out and, try to just find them on the internet. There's, I'm sure you can find some grants out there. Ask your peers if you can read their successful proposals. And then free to everyone is our winning grant proposal competition. And so we have both government and private grants that you can come to our site and read. And they're awesome. I mean, they are just top of the line grants. And so even if they're not your area, you can get a better feel for, all the strengths of that application that then you can start to, develop in your own organization. With the final one of the Freedom of Information Act, if you are looking for a federal proposal and you're going to be writing one through the Freedom of Information Act, you can get copies of successful proposals from that. It's going to take some time, so this is a longer term kind of process, but you can get those successful grants. I also really think that being a grant reviewer, it really helps you learn what funders are thinking of. It helps you learn what questions people have. It lets you see really great grants and really terrible grants. And I think that it really helps you hone your own skills as well. So your local community foundations or your United Ways are always looking for grant reviewers. And then even state and federal agencies use peer reviewers. So again, this could be a really great way to just improve your own skills. And then my last little tip around everything is just not going at it alone, even if you're in a really small organization. That other stakeholders, your board, your volunteers, maybe even your participants might have some skills around different areas, like maybe they like to do research where they could help you, write that statement of need. Maybe they're great storytellers where they can take your results of things and weave really great stories for you to include in your narratives. Maybe you have people who are great editors to help you do things, or they are great at data analysis and can really help you create great charts and graphs and things like that. So just another overall kind of tip, just because I think that we don't have to do it alone. I think people think that grant professionals like to kind of go alone in an office and get it all done, and really we work with people in the organization. And so getting those folks to help can be important. So with all of that, I think I will stop and we can do some questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Alice. We do have a few questions here already. We'll probably end up running over our allotted 1 hour time, but just want to let you all know if you do need to jump off that you will get the recording with the full Q&A there. So let's dive in. Nabil says, by when, like month and year, does your 990 become outdated for your potential grantors for a nimble organization?
Well, usually, you have to submit your 990 once a year. And so, it's whatever that cadence is. I know some people have a calendar year, right? And then some people have a fiscal year calendar. So it's going to be different if you're from, July to June versus January to December. But it really is, I mean, it's that year's 990. And so the next year is when, by tax time, you need to have that filed. So I would follow traditional tax days for whatever kind of fiscal system you're set up on. And they have to be done once a year. So that's when they would be outdated.
Yeah, I would say try to keep it as up to date as you can. I know we've had other presenters who talk about, trying to avoid those extensions and things like that because it can end up looking a little like you're pushing things off.
Yeah.
When he says we have 60% of our funding from individuals, is that a red flag? We always thought it was a strength for the great support we have across our community.
Yeah, great question, Wendy. So no, I don't think that's a red flag. If it was maybe from one donor, that would be a red flag, because what if that one donor went away, right? But you're talking about, you get a lot of individual donations, and that's a big part of your budget. And I think it is a huge community strength as well. So, in your budget narrative, maybe talking about that and how this allows you to, you know, spend money where you need to, that sort of thing. But that is a strength. It's really, if you have like one grant source, or one donor, it's like, that's where it gets, to the red flag area.
Right. Gladys says the board approved budget with regular tracking needs to show all funders and how the funds of every funder are distributed, correct?
I would think that you would have, that each month, or let's see, approved budget. Yeah, so you'd have your overall budget and how much, like, from this grant is being spent in salaries, how much from this grant, for each line item, how it's spent. So that you can look and say, from the Ruhnke Foundation, we've spent $625,000, and you can see that in a line, and you can see each line item, and then it would go over to a total organization budget. But yeah, I would track those columns, if you will.
Natasha says for a very new nonprofit, ours was established 4 months ago. what type of grant opportunities are realistically accessible at this stage? Are there particular indicators funders look for to distinguish normal startup limitations from true organizational red flags?
Yep. So I think that with looking at grant opportunities when you're really, new and young, that you want to start local and you want to start, the easiest ones are going to be like your local community foundations, or, your local businesses and things like that. And usually the applications aren't as challenging as, you kind of keep growing harder and harder as you go kind of up the food chain. Looking at family foundations in your area is a good also kind of first, feeder starter kind of grants. And then, then the beauty of it is as you get that grant and manage it, and then, then the next funder is going to be able to see, oh, they've already managed that. Knowing that you've already managed it, I already have a better, uh, I feel more strongly about you because I know you've already done this before. So start local and start, I think, community, family, and then little business, small businesses or corporations around your area.
Mhm.
Also looking at any kind of in-kind support that you may have, showing that you have a lot of volunteers or you have a lot of donations, even though there's no money exchanging hands, it shows that capacity, right? It shows that support that you have across the community. So don't forget about those either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nabil says, how important are websites like Candid or Charity Navigator? If you have one, do you need to make a profile on the other just to satisfy a funder?
Uh, so there are like Charity Navigator, you can go on, you submit information, you get seals of approval, those sorts of things. I mean, I don't want to say that they're unimportant. I think that they probably help with probably more donors. If there's people
Mhm.
who are out there concerned about your organization or want to make a donation, they might go there more. I don't think a lot of foundations are looking at those websites in order to make determinations on funding you.
Mhm.
But from a donor perspective, it might be more important, and that's not my specialty, the individual donors. But usually one grantor is not going to go there to look for information from you. They're going to ask you to submit what they want from you and use those documents.
Yeah, makes
Yep.
sense. Then Sarah says, do you have any advice on what financial statements would be good to have available on our website or archive there for anyone to look at? Would 990s be sufficient? Or is it a good idea to have financial reviews and full audits available?
Yeah, no, I think, having your 990s on there is great. A lot of our, another presenter that we have that talks a lot about major gifts is always like, do you have a part of your website where those, funders can come and look and see your documents, that sort of thing. So, you could do the 990s is, as long as your audits are nice and clean, why not put them on there? Or if you don't do the audit and you do a financial review, if you had a lot of findings, I probably wouldn't put it on there, but clean audits and all that, and then your 990s, I think that's great. Shows your
Mhm.
transparency. They can
Yeah.
find it anyway if they want,
Yes.
So putting it right, your 990s right on your website's a great idea.
Right. Pamela says, because nonprofits forecast grant funding, how can we make sure that we are forecasting is reasonable and not overstating or overestimating what we think we can bring in for our grants and
No,
donations?
yeah, that is always, challenging, right? Like you're looking ahead into the future and what do I think? I think, ambitious but attainable is really important. You don't want to get out there kind of ahead of your skis and, you know, that you're going to be raising this much money when you don't have that plan in place. So I think, just kind of be like truly logical and honest about what, percentage increase you think might happen year after year. and what's actually doable. But, and you don't want to be unattainable, right? I mean, that's like not going to work for you either. So, taking what you have and increasing it by a percentage that you think is doable is kind of what I would do. Just start there and just add to it.
Yep, makes sense. Um, there are a few questions on how do these basic requirements differ across organizations that operate internationally?
Mm. Well, I think that a lot of funders, I don't know a lot about, international in the sense of, applying to a funder internationally. But I think that a lot of these concepts are really the same. That all these things that we're talking about is something that any funder would want to see. It's not necessarily just US based. I mean, there might be other documents that are required internationally, but I really think that these are things that show organizational capacity, show that transparency, show the sustainability. And so I can't really think of why that would change if it was Canada or Europe or whatever, that you still want the organization to have all these things. Work with each funder, individually, but I think most of this is pretty darn universal.
Great. Then Krista says, Krista was wondering how funders view fee-based nonprofits and if there's any kind of differences. Chris had added that they are a fee-based nonprofit. Most of their funding comes through fees, but then they have pretty high expenses as well. So then the grant funding, they don't get a lot besides from some sister organizations.
Okay. I think that most funders are actually pretty positive about fee-based nonprofits. I mean, it's an earned income stream that you have for your organization. And an earned income stream is a real strength to your organization, that you're bringing in monies through if it's services or events or whatever it is that you're having. So I think I would, just being really clear about what those grant dollars are going to be spent for. Not just saying, it's just going to support everything in the organization that isn't covered, like being more specific about it. But I think most funders are going to actually look at that as a real sustainability benefit for you.
Great.
Yeah.
And then it looks like Sally says, do you have any suggestions for creating stronger evaluation language for grants received for beautification projects or art murals?
Ooh, that's a tough one. You're going to leave me on that tough one?
Yeah, end on the hardest one.
Well, I think, being able to talk about, number one, I also think that simply pictures and things like that, especially for a funder who funded that, that's going to be very powerful to them because, and asking them to come down and be part of the picture for the mural and this and that. The more you can involve them, the happier they're going to be. And then, I think, talking about community development or, just how, the space is used or it could be used. It might not be something that you can necessarily like evaluate depending on the kind of grant you have. But I think just showing that, what kind of traffic an area gets, and then what this space is designed to be used for. And then if you can, then, even talking about how people use the space. But I think that, again, if you have a funder funding something like that, they also are going to understand inherently that those are a little harder to evaluate and that, just having it done might be enough for them. And that's where the pictures or the events that you have, with the ribbon cutting kind of really demonstrate that you did what you said you were going to do.
Visit GrantStation to see our latest online education offerings in the form of live webinars, interactive workshops, and on-demand learning. GrantStation.com.